Welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. If you're gonna have a podcast about exploring Europe, with a major emphasis on rail travel, there's one guy you have to talk to. The man in seat 61. Mark Smith is the man when it comes to European rail travel. The founder of the wildly popular Seat61.com and someone who's been inspiring people to take the train for over 25 years. Well, on today's show, Mark tells me how he first fell in love with rail travel, including a few tales from his early trips across Europe and beyond, and why he believes rail is still the finest way to experience the continent. He then takes us on a tour of some of his favorite European rail stations and cities, while sharing tips on where to grab a coffee or something a little stronger inside those stations, and offering insight into one of the most common questions in European travel: when it makes sense to buy a Eurail Pass and when it doesn't. All right, let's hop aboard.
What is the gap between the train and the platform?
Let's welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns, a man who needs no introduction. Actually, no, he might need a little bit of an introduction because he goes by the man in seat 61, Mark Smith. Mark, welcome.
Hello.
So, we've got to talk about off the top, just in case someone has been living under a rock over the last 25 years. And my definition of living under a rock, to be clear, is not booking European rail trips. So just in case someone's been living under that rock, could you just give us a real quick summary of the man in seat 61, your website, what you do?
Okay. Well, I've been running a website called The Man in Seat 61, seat61.com, for over 20 years now. Can you believe that? And it helps people travel from the UK to any country in Europe, and it helps people travel around various countries and between the European cities by rail, and also helps people travel worldwide in places like Thailand or Egypt or India. So I started as a railway manager working for British Rail, and ended up running the website full-time. I've run it full-time since 2007.
So that is a good thing.
Well, it certainly beats real work. I'll say that. Apart from November, December, when we have the annual European timetable change. That means going through many pages line by line. That feels like real work.
And, what actually pushed you to make the website?
Oh, well, I was commuting to and from London to my job on the train, and the day finally came where I had finished my novel. Not a novel I was writing, the novel I was reading on the train home. So I went into the newsagents at Marylebone Station in London to find something to read, and bought a Teach Yourself HTML book. It was more of a magazine, really. It cost me £2.95, probably the best £2.95 I've ever spent in my life. And it worked, and I got a web page online. And this is in the early days of the internet, 2001.
The innocent days of the internet.
The innocent days, yes, absolutely. I thought I would do something about the massive gap between how easy I found it to travel from the UK down to Italy or Budapest or Spain or Prague or whatever by train, and how impossible it had become to find anyone in the commercial world, meaning the travel industry or even the rail industry itself, who would tell you how to do it. And I thought I would be subversive and put that information online. I thought it was a cry in the wilderness. I never thought anyone would look at it, let alone up to 1 million visitors a month, and I certainly didn't think it would become my full-time job only 6 years later.
Well, that's the best things that come out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
You're starting this at the beginning of the budget airline rise as well.
Well, the budget airlines had been around for a few years. I mean, 1995 was sort of the watershed where they come on the scene and they bring mass air travel. It made rail travel to Europe even less visible. And of course, we were originally going to have sleeper trains from Edinburgh and Glasgow to Paris and from London to Frankfurt. And they actually built the sleeping cars for these in Birmingham. I saw them parked outside the factory. But the budget airlines just knocked the bottom out the business case. They were sold to Canada, and if you want to ride those sleeping cars now that should have run Edinburgh to Paris, you have to go from Montreal to Halifax.
Oh, wow. It's a bit of quirky rail travel history there.
It is. In fact, I've done it. They're very comfortable vehicles, just maybe not suited to the Canadian winter in quite the way they should be.
But you bring up a good thing there, saying that it was the visibility, the ability to travel from the UK and all around Europe and connect trips all around never went away. But there was that visibility that, because I'm American. I first came to Europe in 2006, and I had a Eurail Pass, of course. I had gotten the good advice. But, the other thing that people were whispering in my ear, and that was, oh, you wouldn't believe these budget airlines. You can just get a flight so cheap. And, and that was part and parcel of the experience back then. So, yeah, it was that visibility, like you mentioned, that it was just, all of a sudden, it seemed so cool and so easy. And, there's even an airline with easy in the name. They put it right there.
Well, the problem is that cheap flights have turned travel into a commodity. And it shouldn't be a commodity. It should be an adventure. And the journey should be part of the experience. And when you go by train, you actually see things on the way. You get to see where you're going. You're treated like a human being, not a piece of air freight. You sleep in a bed, you eat in a restaurant, you can stand up and walk around. There are no seat belts to tie you to your seat. You go city centre to city centre, and you feel a sort of connection with the past as well. I mean, you can travel to Istanbul on the route of the Orient Express. You feel that sort of connection with people, where you don't if you're strapped to an EasyJet seat.
Yeah, nothing personal on EasyJet, but obviously, and this podcast, we've got a global audience of people coming to Europe, Europeans, British people, Americans, Australians, but especially to people who come from overseas. You've had to fly to get to Europe. So once you get here, just stick to the rails.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Once you get here, it's part of the experience. You might even meet some of us Europeans.
Ooh. And they're friendly. They're friendly, I'm telling you.
We are. Yeah, absolutely.
Before we move on, feel free to make up a story if you want, because I know you've explained why it's called Seat 61 a million times. So feel free to make one up, or you can give us the real truth. Where did the 61 come from?
This is when I'm giving a presentation, I always forget to mention this. It's always the first question at the end. But yeah, let's talk about it up front. I used to treat myself to first class on Eurostar in the early days of Eurostar when I was going somewhere special. So when I was going from London to Tokyo via Moscow and Vladivostok, or London to Marrakesh via Paris and Madrid and Algeciras, or London to the Crimea via Berlin and Odessa, I would treat myself to first class on Eurostar, and I wanted a seat that was one of a table for two, lined up with a window. Seat 61 ticked all the boxes in coach 7, 8, 11 or 12. And it's still actually the best seat in the house, I think, in the new Eurostar E320 in certain carriages. So when the website turned up, the name was already there, the man in seat 61.
And, just out of curiosity, are you obsessed with 61 all around? Are you getting hotel room 61?
No. It's the best seat on Eurostar. And if I'm traveling on another train, I'll work out what the best seat is there, that gives me a window, that gives me a good view out the window, that's a solo seat in first class with the aisle on one side of the window on the other.
Okay, so the 61 hasn't taken over your life or anything?
No, not at all. Well, the website might have taken over my life, but the number hasn't, no.
In case anyone doesn't know, Eurostar, that is the train, the company that runs the trains between London and the continent.
That's right. London to Paris, London to Brussels. They started it up in 1994. I even got a ride on one before they started public service, because rail staff were used as guinea pigs. So I was one of the guinea pigs on one of the test runs.
Oh, always nice to be a guinea pig.
Absolutely.
Now, you touched on this a little bit, but if you had to distill it down, why is seeing Europe by rail so special?
Well, there's the practical side. It's city centre to city centre. It's if you can get a train journey lasting 3, 4, 5 hours, it's actually faster, or as fast as schlepping to an airport, queuing up for 2 hours, going through all that security, taking a 1-2 hour flight and then having to schlep on a train or bus into the city centre at the other end. And of course, the sleeper train leaves in the evening, arrives in the morning, saves you a hotel bill, takes less time than flying out of your schedule. But really, it's about the enjoyment of the journey, because the journey is as important as the destination. You get to see things, you get to experience things. You know, it's like climbing a mountain and reaching the summit. It will be the same summit whether you took a helicopter there or climbed the mountain. But boy, you enjoy it more if you've actually climbed the mountain, you've made the effort to get there overland, you've seen everything on the way, you're really there. That certainly applies to me on a long journey such as London to Istanbul. In fact, I can remember arriving in Japan via the Trans-Siberian Railway and a ferry, and I'd forgotten to pack any Japanese yen, so I couldn't take a taxi. There was no ATM at the ferry terminal, and I had no choice but to schlep with my backpack through a humid, hot freeway and liquor store environment from the ferry terminal to the station, and I was just grinning from ear to ear. I would see a signpost with Japanese characters on indicating Tokyo to the left, and I would just burst out laughing. I had made it all the way from London Waterloo to Japan without setting foot in an airport or on a plane.
Wow. Yeah. And, I've heard you say before that the second you take the train, it becomes an adventure.
Absolutely. Yep. It's an adventure. It's not just a travel commodity.
Why don't more people do it then? I mean, obviously, plenty, Eurail passes are selling like hotcakes, I'm sure. The trains are full, but what do you think, is stopping that extra 10%, 20% more people doing, exploring Europe by rail?
It's like most things in life. If you put a bit more effort in, you get a lot more out. And you do have to put more effort into two things: finding out about what the options are. No one train company will tell you about the options of travelling by train from the UK to Italy, because Eurostar just wants to get you to Paris or Brussels. The French railways just want to get you from Paris to Milan, and the Italians just want to get you from Milan to Rome. So nobody says, look, you can get from London to Venice or Rome or Florence like this. Nobody does. So you have to put more effort into finding out about it and more effort into booking it, because you're actually booking 3 train tickets from London to Florence, you're booking London to Paris, you're booking Paris to Milan, you have to stay overnight because you can't do it in a full day, and you have to book another ticket from Milan to Florence. So it takes a little bit more effort, but like most things, you get a lot more out.
You get a lot out of it, and what you got out of it is a layover in Paris for 6 hours.
What can you do with a layover in Paris? Eat lunch between trains at what is possibly the most spectacular station buffet in the world, the Tremblay restaurant at the Gare de Lyon. It's a sort of bit like Versailles, only in station buffet form. And you do have to watch out for the rum barber, because I was expecting some sort of weak packaged confection. No, they bring you a sort of sausage of sponge. The waiter whips out a sword. Well, it's a knife, but he sort of wields it like a sword, whips the mark of Zorro into the sponge, and liberally pours fiendish Martinique rum all over it. So all you've got to do at the end is stagger to your train, which fortunately is in the same station, just a few paces away, but it is sort of stagger after that. But what an amazing lunch, what an amazing experience, just eating between trains at the station.
Yeah, and that's actually something I'm going to ask you about a little later, some of your other favorite cafes, because you've helped me find a couple over the years, and I got to give you some props on that. So let's take a step back, though. We're going to now zoom back. We're going to hit the rewind button. This love of rail travel obviously didn't come out of nowhere. You discovered your love of rail in your youth.
Yeah, sort of 1982, the dim and distant past. School trips. There was a school trip to the south of France where we didn't fly. We were all going to stay with French families in the south near Nîmes. We took a boat train, the Channel ferry, and the overnight couchette train from Calais to the south of France. That was a great experience. And then the school Russian trip, where we travelled on a vintage 1940 turbine electric steamer, Russian one, to Oslo, Stockholm, and what was then Leningrad, and then caught a train to Moscow and came back by train across Europe through Berlin, Channel ferry and train to London. And this sort of really opened my eyes. And the same couple of years after, I went on Interrail trips down to Morocco and down to Greece on the train. And that really, I thought, this is the way to see Europe. This is This is exciting. This is an adventure. This is real travel. And I think that's where it all started in the 80s, in my late teens and early 20s.
But now I want to dig into some of these interrail adventures. Like, talk me through some of those. What are some of the most vivid memories you have when you were interrailing, Eurailing around Europe? What are some things that stick with you to this day?
Well, a friend and I went down to Greece and we took the Munich to Athens sleeper train. We ended up with 2 beds in a 3-berth to ourselves. There was no person in the third bed. And it's a fantastic journey through what was then Yugoslavia and across Greece. We carefully put all our litter into the litter bin in our compartment, only to find on the last bit of this 2-day, 1.5 day, 2-night journey, the sleeper attendant came in, picked up our litter bin, chucked it out of the window into Greece. He was Serbian, of course, and that was that. And yeah, we got down to it was a spectacular journey through the Greek mountains on the final day. Athens is absolutely superb place, a real worthy capital city to visit. And then we pootled round the Peloponnese Peninsula through the little places like Kalamata and Corinthos. Such a nice place to visit. Unfortunately, the small railways of the Peloponnese have largely closed now, which is a great shame. Then a friend and I went down to Morocco on the train, and that's a remarkable journey because you end up in Africa, 48 hours, and you're on a ferry and you step ashore in North Africa, and it really is a different world. And yes, you can take a train south from Tangier to Casablanca or Marrakesh, or sort of real Marrakesh Express, and then lose yourself in the souk.
Yeah, I know Morocco has some really nice rail lines.
Well, the strange thing is, it's just opened a high-speed line, which is more than we Brits can do. From Tangier to Casablanca, it's got a version of the French TGV duplex, a double-decker, 300 km/h, that's 186 miles an hour train, and there are European countries that can't match that.
No, well, we're not getting into all that. I'm sure you've got some opinions.
One or two.
So where'd you have the most fun?
We travelled all over on the trains. I can remember arriving in Corfu and discovering that there were signs everywhere with this Greek word, and we didn't know what it meant. We later found that it meant strike. So the day after we arrived, we couldn't buy anything or eat out, or do anything. But that's the sort of thing you learn, the sort of thing that happens when you travel.
We're going to bring it back to the modern day. Let's talk a little bit about this station in London, St. Pancras, this cathedral to rail travel, where the Eurostar takes off. Hasn't been talked about much on this podcast, so I want to give it some love. And I want you to tell me, if you don't mind, a little bit about why you like it so much. But I want to ask you, because I envisage when you show up at St. Pancras to take one of your trips over to Europe, and you head up to the bar, Cersei's upstairs. The bartender looks at you, says, the usual. They slide over a glass of champagne, and, you got fans coming up to you. Is that real?
Not quite, but almost not far off. I mean, St. Pancras, they wrote the textbook on how you should take a classic historic station, opened in 1864, and transform it into a modern terminal. I mean, combining the modern facilities that we all like to use with the classic architecture is the trick, isn't it? And they've done it brilliantly at St. Pancras. And when you think that this station was almost demolished, I mean, you can't believe that anyone would demolish something so spectacular, but they almost did. And of course, poet laureate John Betjeman led the campaign to save it. He managed to save it, and quite rightly, his statue is upstairs on the upper level, a statue of him gazing at the spectacular train shed roof. And I sort of always go upstairs to pay my respects every time I'm going somewhere out of St. Pancras.
Yeah, and to people who haven't been there, I mean, this is like, you said Gothic revival. Is that the technical term of the
Gothic?
architecture?
Yeah, it's very, very Gothic.
It is just like a castle almost meets a cathedral, but with a rail station.
A cathedral is what it is. I mean, they call them cathedrals of steam, the old historic railway stations. And yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
Okay, so we start our journeys here at St. Pancras if you're coming over, because a lot of people come to Europe to do a trip from abroad, and they start in Britain, and then they hop over. So they're going to experience St. Pancras. So we've got the Circes upstairs. You got the statue of John Betjeman. There's also a huge statue of a couple embracing called "I Want My Time with You."
The statue is called the Lovers. The I Want My Time with You is a sort of neon sculpture by Tracy Emin hanging beneath the clock.
So definitely go upstairs. Don't just come in and get into the waiting zone. You definitely want to go upstairs and at least admire the roof and the statues. And
That's right. And in fact, that almost goes for quite a few railway stations. For example, Prague, you could go through Prague station through the modern bit underground and not even realize there is an Art Nouveau station up above. And the best places to hang out for your train are the cafes in that old Art Nouveau section above. And of course, Milano Centrale, Milan Central. What a building. Absolutely magnificent. Ever so slightly fascist, of course. And in fact, if you wander along platform 21 to where the old royal waiting room is and look above the door to the royal waiting room, you can meet Mussolini. The guy on the horse is the King of Italy on the mural. The guy leading the adoring subjects with his eyes gouged out is Mussolini. And there are two stories about why his eyes are gouged out. One, more prosaic, is that workmen after the World War II decided to remove elements of fascism. The more interesting story is that his eyes were shot out by a partisan in 1943. I think I prefer that story.
I like that one. But you're not joking about, taking a look around these stations, because I found out the hard way in Prague. I had been there a couple times, actually, and had never been upstairs. And the last time I was there, we were rushing through downstairs. We're rushing to catch our train. Walk under, see some light coming through, and notice there's a hole above me where there's a whole atrium. And then I hear a piano going. And I'm thinking, what am I missing out on? And I actually checked your site later on to figure out what I was missing out on. And it turns out it was, as you said, a beautiful Art Nouveau facade on the outside and a couple cafes on the inside that are worth lingering before a train.
That's right. That's the place to hang out, not in the shopping centre downstairs.
Yeah, the downstairs, not necessarily romantic or anything like that. Touched on it a little bit there with Prague and Milan. And we've talked about St. Pancras, but what are some other stations that you love pulling into?
Well, one of them's got to be Antwerp Central, hasn't it? If we've talked about cathedrals of steam, and it is a cathedral. It's absolutely magnificent. The station buffet's not bad there either, for if you feel like a beer between trains. It's the ideal interchange point when you're going from sort of Amsterdam to Bruges.
I was gonna mention it anyway, because you've helped me out a few times. You saved me a few times, and that was one with Le Royal Cafe. I was in Antwerp for the first time last November, and we were waiting for the train out. We were heading to Paris. Went in there, and from the outside, you wouldn't know what was in there, and just the architecture. This is like, was it a former royal waiting room?
I think it might have been. I mean, it certainly feels like it. Massively high ceilings, grand decor, and the beer's not bad either.
Unfortunately, I went for a coffee.
If it was the morning, I'll let you off.
It was before noon, which, usually there would be a win in Belgium. It's okay. But I think it was that I had had several the night before, so I sat that one out.
Oh, yeah.
So, but, people who are listening, don't be like me. Treat yourself to a Belgian.
Too.
Now, what do you think of Antwerp in general?
Antwerp's one of the sort of hidden gems. I mean, that's a cliche, isn't it? But I mean, you go to Belgium and you think Bruges, possibly Gand, and then Brussels. You don't think of Antwerp. You think of Antwerp as a sort of a port complex. But actually, it's one of the places you should head to, because it is wonderful. Not just the station, the town itself.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. It has that grittiness of the port, which is always a good thing because it, keeps it real,
yeah.
if you will. It's not too chocolate box.
Yeah, and you can almost put Rotterdam in that category as well. That's somewhere that gets overlooked in the Netherlands, just overshadowed by Amsterdam. But it's got a grittiness. It's a port, but there's a lot to see. Maritime Museum, history, and Rotterdam has a modern station, sort of antithesis of Antwerp. But as modern station goes, it's a really dramatic design. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, no, I've never gotten off the train in Rotterdam, sadly, but I need to fix that sometime.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Sorry for the interruption, but I just wanted to take a second to say thanks for listening to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. I hope you're enjoying the show and it's helping you get excited for your next European adventure. Be sure to check out the episode description because that's where you'll find a link to the show notes and the show's social media info. There's also a link there where you can support the podcast by buying me a beer. I mean coffee, definitely a coffee. All joking aside, any support goes toward keeping the episodes flowing and the show growing. And last but not least, if you are enjoying what you're hearing and you have a spare minute, I'd be forever grateful if you were to leave a review on the platform you're listening on, as those little things really do go a long way. Back to the show.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
So Antwerp Central, this is a beautiful place with a great cafe, just again, cathedral-esque, if you will. We've talked about Prague, hidden gem upstairs, St. Pancras. Couple more, maybe that really gets your blood racing when you're pulling it.
Let's go for Madrid Atocha. It's a station where they've pushed the high-speed trains out of the old train shed and converted the old train shed into a sort of tropical garden. Now, it's lost its turtle pool, unfortunately. It used to have a pool of turtles. And what a wonderful place to hang out in for a beer and a few bits of tapas while you're waiting for your high-speed train. I mean, the modern part is nothing to write home about, but the old bit and what they've done with it is quite spectacular.
So this is the one that has just like this lush tropical garden.
That's right. It's a massive historic train shed, now empty of trains and replaced by a tropical garden. And it's where you go if you're going to catch a train south to Seville or Cordoba or Malaga, right in the heart of Madrid. Where else would we go? There are lots of them, but we've mentioned the ones that really. I mean, let's mention a couple of modern stations: Berlin Hauptbahnhof and Vienna Hauptbahnhof. Those are two modern stations, completely new. They're both very well put together stations. If you don't miss the old architecture, they take their rightful place as the main city station in those great cities. So it doesn't always have to be ancient. Sometimes it can be a modern station and still be quite grand. Berlin Hauptbahnhof is all glass and steel. It's on multiple levels. Some of the trains go north-south underground, others go above ground, east-west. And of course, it's right in the heart of Berlin. It's 10 minutes walk from the old Reichstag and 15 minutes walk from the Brandenburg Gate. Even if you are only changing trains there for an hour or two, you can stroll and see those magnificent landmarks.
Yeah, you're getting me excited to get going here on another trip. But yeah, Vienna, that only opened about 10 years ago, maybe 15?
Yeah, it's not old at all. And of course, Vienna used to be a bit of a pain because it used to have several termini stations, dead end stations. And you either had to, if you were going from sort of north to south, you would have to get off at the Westbahnhof and use city transport to go to the Südbahnhof or whatever for your onward train. Trains would spend half an hour sitting they were going from Munich to Budapest. They'd waste half an hour crawling into the dead end terminus, sitting there. The driver would change ends or another locomotive would have to come on, off it goes. Building a great big central station in Vienna, which is a through station, has allowed the trains to just run straight through the city from Munich through Vienna to Budapest. It's chopped 40 minutes off the journey time and given Vienna a major central station. It's been a real step forward for Vienna. Probably the best rail hub in Europe in terms of connectivity. It's got trains everywhere: Warsaw, Rome, Switzerland.
You're saying that Vienna Hauptbahnhof might have the best sign diversity of destinations.
It might well be the most diverse, the biggest, greatest diversity of destinations on the departure board. It's a shame that the sleeper to Paris has disappeared, but it's still connected by direct train to Brussels, to Amsterdam, to Rome, to Kiev in Ukraine. And until a few years ago, it was connected to Moscow even.
Wanderlust of the departures board, that is real.
It is. It is. You're waiting for a train somewhere mundane, and then suddenly Kiev or wherever comes up on the departure board, and you think, I wonder if I could travel on that train. And the answer is yes. The answer is you can go on these trains. That's almost how I started. I remember having a book called the Thomas Cook Overseas Timetable. It's this wonderful book had timetables in it for routes such as Istanbul to Baghdad, with little bed symbols for sleeping car and a cross knife and fork for restaurant car, and runs Tuesdays and Thursdays, Istanbul, Header Pasha to Baghdad. And you think, what stops you from just buying a ticket and taking them? And nothing does, apart from the fact they discontinued that particular one. But I was able in 1995 and 2005 to buy a ticket from Istanbul to Aleppo in Syria, which was then safe. We did it. I did it. And what an amazing journey. I traveled from London all the way down to Istanbul, Aleppo, Damascus, and in the second occasion, I got as far as Aqaba on the Red Sea before turning back and coming back to London overland.
Oh, wow.
It's sometimes you just need inspiration.
So yeah, with Vienna, that new station, that Westbahnhof, it's kind of nondescript, where no one's going to ever say it's a cool station.
If you were going to film something about spies in the Cold War, you'd probably do it at Vienna Westbahnhof, because it still has that sort of, not quite Western Europe, but not Eastern Bloc. But maybe the Western spies will beat the Eastern Bloc spies at Vienna Westbahnhof with the trains to the east and the trains to the west. It's got that feel to it, even today.
The first time I was in Vienna, I had arrived at that station. And then this was back in like 2007. And when I went Eurailing, they would give you a little booklet that had the timetables in it. Now, I don't think it was anything, on the level of like the European rail timetable, which I know you're a big fan of, but it was, it got me around. I was leaving very, very early from Vienna to go to Český Krumlov in Czechia. So I assumed I was going back to the station that I had arrived at.
No.
So I trundled out from the hostel probably like 7, 8 a.m. I believe it was like a Sunday morning, very quiet city. Found out real quick that was the wrong station. Had to desperately ask people, and they sent me to another station that, again, when I finally found it by the help of some students who were still out from the night before on the street, it was very nondescript. Like you would have walked past it and not known it was a station.
I know. You're absolutely right. Franz Josef Bahnhof, with all the charm of a multi-story underground car park.
Yeah, because I remember they were like, it's up on the left. It's up on the left. I remember doing a thing where I like stood there, did a couple roundabouts, and then they were like, to the left, to the left. I finally made it in there, made it over to Český Krumlov, had a good time. But, so Vienna needed an upgrade, I guess you'd say. So as far as we talked a little bit about stations, what about just cities? What are some of your favorite cities? When you mentioned Berlin, to have a few hours, within an hour, you can see a sight. But, maybe just a couple cities that you like to maybe if you get stuck with 3 or 4 hours, you're thrilled.
Oh, well, let's take Turin, because Turin, along with Trieste, those are the two cities that are probably the most underrated cities in Italy. Florence, Venice, Rome, that's the tourist trail, that's the tourist trek, the tourist circuit. Nobody goes to Turin or Trieste, and they are both fabulous cities. And if you're going from the UK to Florence or Rome or Naples, it's too far to comfortably do in a day, so you want an overnight stop. It's easy to do the stop in Milan, but actually doing the overnight stop in Turin is much better. It's an incredibly elegant city, incredibly grand. The architecture is superb. And you will love it in particular if you're a fan of the 1969 Michael Caine film, The Italian Job. Do you remember the film where the red, white, and blue minis charge around the city trying to evade the police after the heist of the Italian security van? That's the film. And there are some superb filming locations around there. I mean, the tourist board kiosk wasn't that much help in finding the locations, in spite of my very, very best Michael Caine impression. They didn't seem to know any particular places.
or maybe because of.
Possibly, but it's a fabulous city.
Actually, on this trip my wife and I took last autumn, we strung together a few of these places. We did Antwerp, a Paris layover for one night, then to Marseille, and then we went to Turin. We finished in Turin, and then we took the train back to Paris, spent another night, and then back home. So we did kind of a great loop. But we hit Antwerp and Turin. The idea was to kind of see a little bit of these second-tier, lesser-known places. And yeah, that Turin station is really nice on the upstairs now.
Oh yeah, well, both of them are fairly good stations. The old one in the center is the historic one. It's got a modern one as well. But you mentioned Marseille. And Marseille is almost like Turin, in that everyone wants to go to Nice or Cannes. It's, the famous Côte d'Azur. Marseille is a much grittier city. But we're back to our gritty port cities, aren't we? But if you want a literary connection, look out into the bay from Marseille, and there is the former prison, the Chateau d'If. That's where the Count of Monte Cristo was imprisoned. So you've got that Dumas literary connection. You've got the magnificent Église Notre Dame up on the hill above the Vieux Port. There's umpteen restaurants that will sell you the traditional Marseille seafood dishes. It's an incredible place to stop, but people just bypass it on their way to Nice.
And for a rail lover, coming out of that station and getting the view was remarkable. And that dramatic staircase they have on the station, I got to tell you about, hold on, I need to look the name of this place up. There's this place in the upstairs of Torino, Porta Nuova, a restaurant. It's like an American Old West chain restaurant.
I know that restaurant. I think I might have eaten there, actually.
How was it?
I think it was a good steak.
I'm trying.
Yeah,
it's called Old Wild West.
That's it. In the main hall, upper story. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So anybody, just out of curiosity, if you want to have a peek, check out the upstairs. Newly renovated, super nice. We ended up one night we had gone and done local food the first 2 nights, and we had some great meals. But we were just like, you know what? We're tired of researching and hitting the pavement. We just went and had a Five Guys burger in the upstairs of the Torino station.
Sometimes a burger hits the spot.
All right. So, but just a couple, other cafes in stations, because that's one thing I love about your site too, is that you do always make a point to let people know where they can have a drink or a coffee in a station. We've covered Le Royale and Antwerp. Sadly, rest in peace, the restaurant in Amsterdam Central.
Oh yes, with Elvis the Cockatoo on the bar. That was a great loss. I've yet to find a replacement in Amsterdam, but we live in hope.
Any others?
The Brasserie Fédérale is a good place on Zurich station for steak, frites, and a beer between trains. And of course, Zurich is always one of those places you find yourself killing time between trains, because you arrive from Paris on a high-speed train, you're catching the sleeper to Zagreb or Ljubljana or Budapest, and you need a bit of sustenance before.
I love that you just say these things like we're all doing it. Like it just.
Are we not? I don't know. It's second nature now. So the Brasserie Fédérale in Zurich. Where else have we got? At the Gare du Nord, where you arrive in Paris or leave for Eurostar for London, of course, there is the Terminus Nord, the Brasserie Terminus Nord across the road. Now, that does fantastic seafood. So if you feel like having some oysters before your train back home, I was going to research another restaurant near the Gare du Nord that I'd heard of and thought I ought to try out, but because I was back at the Gare du Nord within 2 weeks of my last trip, and I'd already done the Brasserie Terminus Nord 2 weeks ago, and I thought, to heck with it. The Brasserie Nord was fantastic. I'm going to have to go there again. So I didn't get to research that other restaurant. But, there are places you are happy returning to when you pass through these places. There's another great restaurant that's actually a short walk from Milan Centrale, the Noblesse Oblige. Fantastic home-cooked Italian food. And that's worth knowing because there isn't anything that really grabs me in the station itself at Milan Centrale.
Okay. Yeah, there's just that little sandwich bar on the upstairs that gives you a nice view of the platforms, but it's not really knocking it out of the park on the food.
It's not good view of the trains, but
So obviously, one thing as we get to the end here, Eurail Pass versus not Eurail Pass. What do you're obviously you're a huge fan of the product in general.
yeah, I mean, it's a question of getting both options in perspective. If you're only going to make a couple of short hops, I mean, Pisa, Pisa to Florence, €9. You don't need a rail pass to do that. If you're only making 2 or 3 long distance trains, well, rail fares work like airfares. So if you book in advance, you can find some really cheap deals. I mean, Amsterdam to Berlin from €37.99, Berlin to Prague from €18.99. You don't need a $300 rail pass to make an €18 journey, or even 2 or 3 of them. But if you're going to travel at short notice, if you're going to do lots of long distance, it can be cheaper. And the important thing is a rail pass is a lot more flexible than advance purchase tickets. If you were traveling around Europe for 2 or 3 weeks and you booked your itinerary with advance purchase, no refunds, specified train only, no changes to travel plans ticket, and journey number 2 was affected by a national strike or a landslide or a flood or a fire or whatever, and you couldn't then take journeys 3 to 20, your tickets would collapse like a house of cards. Whereas with a rail pass, you simply replan, reschedule. You can even reroute to avoid a country that's on strike that day, which is such an advantage over advance purchase tickets. That's the real clue. Of course, the thing to remember is there's pass-friendly countries and non-pass-friendly countries. If we draw a line down the middle, Italy, France, Spain, you just have to factor in reservation fees. You're talking 10 to 13 euros for every high-speed train, whereas to the east, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Benelux, don't take the geography too literally, all those countries, you can usually just hop on a train without a reservation and sit where you like. If you want a reservation, it's a few euros. So they are much easier to use a rail pass in.
And this reservations comes up often.
Well, France, Italy, and Spain run high-speed, long-distance trains like airlines. Every seat is reserved. You can't, if the train is full, you can't travel. Whereas the Germans and the Austrians and Danish and the Dutch and the Belgians and the Swiss run trains in the old school way, the way we Brits do, where you can always buy a flexible ticket and jump on. Now, you might find if there's a pop concert on and major football match on the same day, and you're last to board, you haven't got a seat and you have to stand up until somebody gets off. That's the risk. But you can always buy these flexible tickets and travel. And those are the countries where you can use your pass flexibly. You can make a reservation if you want to be sure of a seat, but if you really want to be spontaneous or you can't get a reservation, you can still travel. I find it really reassuring, really flexible, and much nicer than the world where everything is reserved.
But obviously, it always bears repeating. There's always slower trains between point A and point B that, in theory, you could go from the tip of Norway, all the way down to Sicily without paying a reservations. It would just take a little more time. But like we said at the beginning, the more time, the more work you got to put into it, the more fun. All right. Now you're a huge fan of ferries too. I mean, you're on ferries
Oh, yes.
seemingly almost as much as trains. Well,
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we enjoy the journey, and if we enjoy being treated like a human being with a bed to sleep in your own room at night and a restaurant to eat your food in, then what's better than a floating hotel? And there are ferries that are useful to and from the UK. For example, we don't all live in London. If you live up north, there's a ferry overnight from Newcastle to Amsterdam with a bus connection to Amsterdam Central Station. There's a ferry from Hull to Rotterdam Europort with a bus connection to Rotterdam Central Station. Those are great ways of just bypassing London and getting straight to the continent. And of course, we've got Brittany ferries that sail from Portsmouth on the south coast, both to Brittany and Normandy and Spain even. So if you wanted to take a ferry all the way from the UK to Spain, you can. And we can forget 1970s buckets with pie and chips in a basic restaurant. These ferries are now floating hotels. They have cabins with showers and toilet. They have excellent food in the restaurants. And on the ferry to Spain, the dolphins were the icing on the cake. Dolphins at sunset. You don't get that on EasyJet.
Again, we're not picking on EasyJet.
Or Ryanair. You don't get them on Ryanair either.
So, one little bit of advice: if right now someone's listening to this podcast in the future and they're on a flight to Europe, or they're on a train down from Scotland or North England or the West Country or London, they're crossing over the continent, what's one bit of advice you'd give them for that upcoming rail adventure?
Oh gosh, what are my top tips? One of my top tips is don't use ordinary shoes. Get some of those hill walking shoes, the ones that are designed for hiking. Not your walking boots, your big heavy boots, but your small walking shoes designed for hiking in the Alps. Even if you're wandering around cities and standing on your feet in museums all day, they are a godsend. Take a power bank, because we can't allow our phones to run down now. And don't be tempted by those flights. Just see what you can do overland, because it will be far more interesting.
To close things, when you're on a train, you get up from your seat, you stretch your legs, you walk out into the corridor, you look out the window, sun's going down. What goes through your mind in those moments?
You know, the best feeling is sitting on a train or standing in the corridor watching the world go by, maybe sipping a glass of wine, and just being happy, being who you are, where you are. And I don't think we do enough of that these days.
That's a great way to end it. Thank you so much for all the information that you put out there for us, demystifying a lot of European rail travel, the connections, the stations. You've helped a lot of people get off the bench and get into the game and explore by rail, and appreciate it.
Thank you.